Hey everyone, welcome back to Thought Leaders Cafe. Today we have got Daljeet with us, and she's leading the Developer Productivity Org at Walmart Global Tech. As leaders, it's not just about getting things done ourselves, it's all about empowering our teams to do their best work, whether that's by creating the right environment, clearing out roadblocks, or building a culture of collaboration. There's a lot we can do to help developers really thrive. So, if you're a manager, a team lead, or just curious about how leadership can make a difference in productivity, stick around. This one is for you. Hi, Daljit. Welcome to my channel.
Thank you for having me, Aruna. I'm so excited to talk about, everything we talk developer productivity, Gen AI, what's happening in the industry, what's coming up. Really excited, really close to my heart topics. So very excited to be here.
Yeah, I realize it's very close to your heart. You've been with developer productivity for a pretty long time. Maybe start with the introduction, how close you are to developer productivity, and we can go from there.
Yeah, definitely. So I have been in the industry for over 2 decades now. I started as a software engineer, very traditional background, a com science degree, started as a software engineer, moved into some architecture. I worked with IBM for a very long time, gained a lot of experience there, especially on scale and how enterprise applications work. And then I moved into some startup world. Spent about 5 years working with different companies in New York City area, where I moved into engineering management and led the teams, small, large teams. And really, that's where I realized that as an engineering manager, as a leader, you start paying more attention to productivity. You start paying more attention to how engineers are day to day, what their tasks are, and how they are performing their tasks, and what are the blockers that you can help them remove. What their experience is like being in your team, developing a product with you, right? And that's where I started really understanding developer productivity as a manager, as a leader of the team. But then I joined Walmart as part of the developer experience team, and now I'm the group director here, and I work on developer productivity for Walmart Global Tech, and just going very deep into developer productivity and developer experience for last 4 years. So it has been a passion for several years, but specifically last 4 years, really going deeper into this area.
Yeah, nice. That's a great introduction. When you define developer productivity, it was interesting to see you define as a holistic developer experience. It was nice to hear, oh, it's not about the number of lines of code they write, it's not about the number of user stories they deliver, it's about the experience. That's really very nice to think in that perspective. Can you elaborate what you meant by that?
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, developer productivity is developer experience. And what I mean by that is that if developers have great experience, they are motivated to be more productive. They feel good about the work they are doing. They understand the value or the impact they are bringing to the business. It just makes them feel more part of the team, and that leads to productivity. So it's a very soft metric. It's not a number that you can put on it. That's one thing. The other thing I would say is productivity is a side effect of experience. So if the developers are constantly context switching, or they are part of large group meetings where they're not participating as much as they need to, or they are in meetings that they are not even needed in, right? Or they are struggling to install something on their laptop because the internet connection is slow. So that all is experience. That is not the actual developer task that they are performing, but these extra things that they must do to perform their task lead to a bad experience, leading to reduced developer productivity. So I think both of the productivity and experience are so closely aligned, because it's not about like doing tasks faster, right?
Right.
It's more about, are those tasks impactful? Are we leading to a point where we are enabling the developers, we are enabling software engineers in our team to do more, or do more of the business impactful tasks, right? Or opportunities for them to do more customer interaction, or opportunities for them to do more innovative stuff, not just a task that is completed in a silo.
Yeah, and also cut down the waste. As you said, you don't have to be in a meeting if you're not actually contributing to it. I usually tell my developers to be very protective of their time, especially when you're in a meeting and then you don't add value and it's irrelevant to you. Feel free to drop off. I think that should be established as a culture in the organization because sometimes people are there just to show their face off, thinking of the consequence of what would happen if I'm not there or what would happen if I drop off from the middle of the meeting. I think leadership should create that culture. If you're not finding it valuable or if you're not adding any value to the conversation, it is okay to drop off from those meetings and voice your opinion. It's okay. That's a great culture that we all need to build. We started off with the benefits of developer productivity. What are the challenges? Even though we all have good intentions, there are always some challenges in implementing processes or bringing in initiatives within the team. So, what are the challenges you have faced within your team?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think when we talk about developer productivity, the biggest challenge is how do you measure it? Right? And this has been a problem for several years, several decades, right? Even when there were no developers, it is for skilled workers or for knowledge workers. How do you measure their productivity? Now we are talking about, because we're in software engineering, we talk about developer productivity, but it's really about knowledge worker productivity, and how do you measure it is the biggest challenge. And every time when you see a new tool in software industry, you will say that okay, if you use this tool your productivity is improved, but it's so hard to measure. And then it becomes a norm to use that tool. You can think of any tool that we have used in past years, starting from Zoom to Slack to Jira, any tool, right, that we have used. Every tool started with, hey, it will improve your productivity as a knowledge worker, right? Whether it's part of your day-to-day task or you use it once in a week or whatever, right?
Right.
So I think there are some really good industry definitions of productivity or mechanisms of measuring productivity. And I usually try and go back to basics, right? For example, like the two, as you might know already, the two biggest that are most popular are DORA and space metrics,
Right.
right? So when we talk about DORA, it's very popular. There are a lot of good things about DORA. First, you don't have to educate people. People usually in the industry know. As you hire new people, as you hire new leaders, it's usually the norm, right? And the four things we measure in DORA, which is lead time, deploy frequency, change failure rate, and MTTR, those
Right.
four are usually very closely aligned to the day-to-day tasks developer do. So if I expand it a little bit more, I would say that, for example, when we think of SDLC stage or a task that developer is doing or what their journey looks like is, first they do prepare a requirement gathering, then they do some technical design, then develop or code, then they do testing and deployment, and finally they do maintaining the software or operating the software. Now, the four DORA metrics are actually aligned to those because lead time is really when you are saying, okay, I have the requirement, I need to start writing the code. Deploy frequency is how frequently you are deploying or how fast you are putting your features out, right? Change failure rate is all about deployment and testing. If you have tested well, your failure rate is low. And MTTR is all about maintaining or sustaining your software in production. So if you actually have a change failure rate or an incident or an issue in production, you are able to recover faster, right? So those four become like the foundation for measuring productivity because they're so closely aligned to the task developers are doing, right?
Right.
But there's one thing missing that we all know, which is going back to our initial conversation of the experience or the job satisfaction when developers are actually working on a product team or a project, right? And that's where I am really always fascinated to space metrics, right? Because space actually takes the DORA metrics a step further and it measures the satisfaction and well-being, right? So space, as you might be aware, stands for satisfaction, performance, activity, communication, and efficiency, right? So it definitely includes all the DORA metrics as part of activity and efficiency, but it also has the satisfaction. It also has the communication aspect. And that's where, when we talk about meetings where you are not supposed to be, or you are basically there because you just want to listen in if you will miss anything, or you're communicating with project managers or product managers, or I usually call them developers friends. So all the roles that are surrounding developers, when you're communicating and collaborating with the developers friends type of roles, how efficiently are you able to do that? And measuring those things in combination really can give you a measurement of productivity for your team. um, so what I believe is that if you were to pick space and a combination of Dora, as a team, what you need to really decide is am I picking based on what data I have available, right? Because ultimately, data quality is super important in measuring something like this. If you have data available and you baseline and you say, okay, I pick these five things, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be same for every team. It doesn't have to be same for the entire company. But if you have picked those for your team and you're able to see the incremental shift in the data, then as a leader, as an engineering manager, you can go back and say that, yeah, I see this aspect improving, whether it's PR merge time, whether it's lead time, whatever, or change failure rate. You can definitely see that, okay, these metrics are improving, so we are good, but these metrics are not moving at all. So what are the blockers? Or some metric is moving in the wrong direction. So what are the things we need to do as a team to overcome any blockers or any issues that might be leading up to reduced MTTR or reduced deploy frequency, whatever it is, right? So I think that's the biggest challenge, and the way to solve it is customize the metrics for your own team, but make sure that whatever you're measuring is supported with good quality data.
Right, right. Awesome. In fact, one of the challenges that we had in our group about implementing Dora metrics is, yes, Dora metrics defines these four categories at a high level, but there is still a scope of interpreting them in different ways. For example, what is lead time? Is it the time to go to production, right? From when? Is it from the time you came up with a requirement, or is it from the time you created a PR, or is it from the time you merged onto the main? That's when the actual production pipeline kicks off. So that is interpreted differently in different teams. That makes it challenging to compare yourself with a standard. Where am I performing well against the industry standard? That's one of the challenges we faced. Then we decided to compare ourselves. Okay, I was here today, and then how am I looking 3 months down the line? That's another. And then deployment frequency, I think Google came up with this assumption of course, there's a continuous deployment. You keep sending code to production, even without actually exposing to the customer. Maybe it could be behind a flag, like a beta release. How frequently are we actually deploying is the measurement, but somebody has to sometimes push the button to open it up to production. So what exactly is that? Is it the feature delivered to the customer to experience and share, or is it just the builds that are going to production? So that is still not clearly defined. So how do you make sure when you adapt something like Dora metrics, how close are we to the standard implementation, or even if there is a standard implementation?
That's a really good point. And I think standard implementation is very hard to achieve because there are so many things in within your team, the structure of the team, the product requirements, the really the face of your product, right, or the stage your product is in. You might be working in a product that is really in the growth mode, so you are just growing market share, or you might be in a product that is ready for deprecation or ready end of life kind of, or you're simply in a sustaining kind of product, which is you being used, but there's no new feature, no new growth happening. So there are other things outside of Dora metrics, outside of SDLC, that actually impact these numbers.
Right.
And that's why I think the standards are more of a guideline or guiding principle than anything. But what matters is once you start with a baseline, you can say that for this team, this is the baseline. And as you were saying, you compare to yourself. You compare the
Right.
teams yourself, and you adjust for changes that happen, like seasonal changes, flexible, PTOs or whatever you have, or holidays or whatever you have, like when people are not available. You adjust to those, right, as you analyze the data. So I think I feel that one of the misconception about developer productivity is there is this number and we want to see it move,
Yeah.
and we want to see it move as much as the next door neighbor has moved it, but that's not really true, right? And then that's where a lot of teams feel the pressure, and that leads to bad developer experience. Because what
Yeah.
happens if leaders start saying that, okay, this is the number, let's pick something from the industry, Gen AI code generation, right? You will see several different articles or news feed, you will see in industry today, where they are claiming, some of the code generation are claiming 25%, others might be claiming 45%. Some company will come out and say, oh, we have achieved 35%, whatever the number is, right? Everyone is claiming different number with different tools. That doesn't mean if I start using that particular code generation tool or that particular Gen AI testing tool, I'm going to see the same number in my organization or in my team, right?
Right.
So that's a more of a guiding principle. Yes, in all the best circumstances, if you had all these experienced people and this combination of a senior developer, staff developer, and a junior developer sitting together, you will see X% increment in your efficiency when writing code. Good. But that's not true for me because I have 5 junior developers and only 1 staff engineer to support them.
Right.
Right. So it's you have to take it with a grain of salt, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I think it can be like a pointer uh, to measure, but not exactly you can compare against a specific number that you want to achieve. That's a
Yeah.
good point. Since we touched upon Dora metrics before we move on, against each of these four targets, can you give some tips on each? Like how do you improve lead time or how do you improve deployment frequency? So just a couple of tips on each of these.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think once you decide that these are some of the metrics that you are going to track or measure, the way to do is treat developers as your customers, so to speak, right? And understand what are the pain points they have in different areas.
Mhm.
Then you pick the tools that you need to provide or processes you need to provide to implement. So I would say there is, if let's pick deploy frequency as an example, right? With deploy frequency, there is no one tool that can lead to higher deploy frequency. It's going to be a combination of tools, and it's going to be a combination of tools plus processes, right?
Right.
Because a lot of times, what I have seen in my experience as a leader is one scrum team is working totally different than other scrum team, which is good because that
Yeah.
is what agile is, right? You are a self-organizing team and you can
Right.
decide your own processes. So to implement a process improvement in one team will look very different than the other team, right? Um, but when it comes to tools, you can also see what are the tools that are being used to a deployment, but leading up to a deployment. So what do you do when you need to deploy a feature? You understand the requirement, you code, you test, you deploy, right? So those are the 4 things you do as a developer. So are there any tools in the industry that we can bring in to our teams? Are there any new tools that we can build or buy to accommodate for any challenges that they are facing
Yeah.
in those 4 tasks, and that will lead to deploy frequency. So
Okay.
going back to some of the popular Gen AI capabilities that are available in open source world, in through vendor companies, and even on like a SaaS offering basis from different companies today, you will see that on each of these stages, there are tools that you can bring to help developers. but the tool in each of those are going to give you a single digit percent improvement, which will lead to a double digit percent improvement in deploy frequency. So as
Okay.
an example, you could bring a chatbot, a GenAI chatbot, that can help them with the design phase, that by answering questions about hey, generate the architecture diagram, or I have generated this architecture diagram, can you review it, can you provide me feedback, is this correct separation of duties between microservices, am I
Mhm.
creating the right payload, things like
Mhm.
that. You can use a chatbot as an initial review, right,
I see.
before going to staff or principal engineer. When you come to coding, you can have a code generation tool. There are several GenAI code generation tools available as SaaS offering as well as vendor and open source offerings. You can bring one of those and say it's going to help you write code faster, right?
Mhm.
But it's not that you can complete the whole functionality, but the one step of writing code is going to be faster with this. Now,
Okay.
same thing with testing. You can bring one of the GenAI tools that actually helps you write functional tests, that helps you write unit tests faster. And a
Mhm.
combination of those then lead to faster deployments.
Yeah.
And one of the other thing I think is very helpful with GenAI is PR reviews, right?
Mm.
As much as design, because usually what happens with PR reviews is up to code, it's more or less the developer who is working on it. But when it comes to peer review, the communication and collaboration aspect actually comes in picture, right? Now
Right.
you're waiting for someone else in your team to do the review. You're waiting for someone else if you have two review mandatory, and then you're fixing back and forth communication over Slack or over the shoulder reviews. A lot of those comments from my previous experience, when I was a developer, I felt like, yeah, this is more of an opinion than anything
Right.
else, right?
Right.
Yeah. So those types of situations, or some of those are just aesthetics rather than actual functionality, right? And some of those are actually tackled with GenAI pretty good, because GenAI can review your code and tell you, okay, these are your standards,
Mhm.
and based on your company, these are your standards, or based on my knowledge of internet, these are the standards that regular TypeScript code should follow, or regular Java code should follow, and you're missing unit tests and this and that, right? And that
Right.
can actually fast track your PR review and overall cycle time. That leads to higher frequency in deployment.
That's a beautiful explanation. GenAI is changing the way developers experience the whole development process. For us, a few things that we did, the lead time to go to production. One of the challenges we had was running AATs. We had a huge set of AATs. We wanted to cut them off, just move only the critical tests on the pipeline, and then run the 100% of the suite outside of the pipeline as a nightly. So that takes off some of the burden on the pipelines, that cut us the time to go to production. And flakiness, oh my god, developers would really love when I say it's flakiness. It's something that everybody knows, but there's no magic solution there. Sometimes you're dependent on another API, which is probably slow today and it just fails. Or we have a test data, and sometimes people just modify the test data without realizing it test data, and the test fails. So, and yeah, sometimes we don't know. They just run it until it passes. That takes a lot of time to go to production. So we wanted to avoid the flakiness. Identifying even what tests are flaky. We don't have good enough tools in market today. And for deployment frequency, as you said, definitely lots of tools. And it is also, I feel, the processes. Sometimes when we break down the user stories, sometimes they're not even user stories. If they're not broken down, they are actually smaller features. So, and
Mhm.
then if you're cutting a PR for each of the user story, then you end up probably developing sometimes beyond a sprint, that's 2 weeks, and then you're cutting a PR later. So we wanted to make sure that the user stories are granular enough, atomic enough, that for every user story, when you're cutting a PR, then you're going to production frequently than what you would do if you were just coding for a couple of weeks at a time. So we make sure that the user stories are granular enough. Change failure rate. all the testing that we do, all the tools, like you said, the PR reviews can be automated. We have SonarCube to validate the sanity check of the PRs. And then the MTTR, we make sure we, again, the R is not a resolution, it's
Yes.
restore. So sometimes people start getting into fixing the problem while in production rather than fixing it, just restore it to the previous state and then you can take your time fixing it. So just educating the developers to making sure that you don't spend time. Either you revert the PR or restart a server, whatever it is, just get the system up and running. So mean time to recover, and it's not mean time to resolve. Resolve is also a metric, but MTTR should be just recover first. So educating the team on those lines. These have helped a lot, but I feel are there any open source tools to measure DORA metrics that I can just put it in my pipeline and then measure it automatically instead of manually tracking these metrics?
I think I have not played with as much open source tools, as much as more custom tools. So I'm not familiar with any open source tool. I would say that if you are using the standard GitHub standard code repositories like GitHub or standard task software like ServiceNow or Jira,
Mhm.
they come with a lot of good features that can be bundled together to figure
Mhm.
out the deploy frequency as well as MTTR, because you are then tracking your issues in Jira or ServiceNow or any other mechanism or a task or ticketing system, so to speak, right?
Mhm.
So the big ones definitely come with a lot of good features that might be
Okay.
suitable for smaller teams. But I'm not aware of any like open source tools
Okay.
of the bat.
Okay. Whenever you start communicating with your team that we are going to measure something, it doesn't send a positive vibe. It always comes like, oh, I'm going to be now monitored and it's going to affect my performance because now I'm measured on how many PRs I do, how many lines of code I do, how many points I deliver. So, what is your tip about communicating the message in the right way to the developers that it's not about monitoring them, but it's about improving the overall process. It's a culture we need to create. So, what's your
Yeah,
experience?
yeah. Yeah, great point there, because I think when we talk about measuring developer productivity, even though we say developer, I think it is more about the team than an individual developer, right? Because we say developer productivity because developers make up the team, right? But when we are communicating to the team. When we are measuring team's performance, and that not only takes that stress out of the equation that now I will be measured by number of PRs or number of story points, which is terrible, by the way.
Yeah,
Story
yeah,
points will be very bad. Even the PRs, number of PRs is
right,
also terrible because, hey, what is the size of the PR? Now you start
right,
gaming the system, right?
right, right.
So I think when we talk about these things, whether it's PR cycle time or deploy frequency, it's about the product and the product team, not about individual people. And communicating that very clearly definitely helps. So when I was an engineering manager, the way I brought a little bit of a cultural shift within my team about deploy frequency, that was really the metric I was tracking at the time. Um, the whole point was measure what matters and communicate it daily. So the way I did very tactically was every morning on Slack, there was this chart that I was looking at that, okay, how many deployments did we do this week, right? Or every single week, every single day, we are looking at the same data together as a team, not pointing a single person and not even looking at the data at the person level, but as a team level. So, hey, this team has 15 people and we have done five deployments this week. Good. Last week we did only three. So that's good. And I think people people will see that, people will value that you are not measuring their individual performance but as a team, and they will help each other out, because then it becomes more of a team thing. And you can definitely have celebrations around it, which was very helpful when I was trying to drive this change. Is let's hit a number for the month, and then let's have a celebration, whether it's a small ice cream party or whatever in the office,
Nice.
right? And
Okay.
hey, we gotta celebrate because we hit a number with our deploy frequency. Plus, again, I think it's very important when we are measuring something to counter it with another metric that helps balance it out. So, as an
Mhm.
example, for deploy frequency, I want to see it go, but I also want to make sure change failure rate remains low, because I don't want people to be deploying too frequently without testing and
Right.
creating issues or change failures, right?
Yeah.
Or even you can say as simple as a sonar violation. Without increasing sonar violations, if your deploy frequency is increasing, that's good. So
Yeah.
always have a counter metric to balance it out, to avoid any gamification of the system. That's
Yeah.
another one. And I think when really fostering the culture for data driven decision making comes from how you as a leader start using the data, because the more you look at the data, the quality of the data goes higher, because now people will keep it clean, right?
Right.
And the team will get the message that yes, this data is important, so we not only keep it clean, but also as a team we are meeting this goal, or we are striving towards improving this number.
Yeah, yeah, that's a beautiful answer. Because these metrics are not in absolute sense, they're all related. As you said, you can deploy frequently to production, but what if you're causing failures? It doesn't make sense because probably just to get that metric hit, you're probably pushing untested code because you want to get there faster. That's a beautiful message. And so, how do you measure underperformance? Somebody who's not productive. Um, like, do you use any of these metrics to identify underperformance?
Usually, no, I wouldn't. I think because these metrics are very hard metrics, they can play a role, but I wouldn't say that one person or compare people on these metrics, because I think that actually is not good for a team's culture. It actually um, when we say that we build a team, we are trying to build trust among individuals, right? Among individual developers. And singling one person out, or not having empathy around, okay, maybe this week this person's PR rate was low versus because they had some problem, right? Or a personal problem. So I usually don't use these metrics for managing performance at all. I haven't done it as an engineering manager, and now as a leader also, I don't recommend my managers do it. There are other ways. There are simpler ways to do that, which is when you are working with a staff engineer or a principal engineer who is responsible for mentoring and reviewing the code of other developers, right? Getting feedback, getting 360 feedback, having getting information from peers who work directly, because as a leader sometimes you don't get to work with individual contributors directly all the time,
Right.
right?
Right.
So getting the on the ground listening is more important, or on the ground feedback is more important than these numbers, because these numbers don't tell the whole story, right?
Right.
So I usually don't use these for performance management.
Okay. So, where do you draw a line between somebody's instinct was bias versus identifying underperformance by numbers? I'm trying to strike a balance here. For example, if everybody says this person is not performing, maybe because he's not a friendly person, but he performs actually well. He delivers. He or she is really good at what they do, but they don't have a good rapport with others. So when you go and ask feedback from all of these other peers or probably managers, they might give you a feedback that is probably not the same way, because how do you avoid biases is my question.
Yeah, no, that's a great follow up, because I feel when managing performance for individuals, it's important to have that balance. Important to have what's on the ground reality versus what you see, right?
Mhm.
And also try to remove any recency bias, which is very common. That in
Right.
recent times, this person has been just not doing great because of a reason, and that doesn't mean they are not a good engineer, right?
Right.
But really, I think going back to the example that you were saying, my opinion in this is you want to build a team based on trust where individuals are helping each other and they're growing together. So
Mhm.
if you have a rock star engineer but they are not getting along with others, I think they are not a good fit for your team.
Mhm.
They
Mhm.
should be in a role that doesn't involve team collaboration, and there might be roles like that, right? But when
Right.
we're talking about building a team, we want people who are actually collaborating with each other. That skill is more important than anything
Right.
else, because five people working together can actually solve a problem even if they are a little bit lesser smart than one person working
Right.
alone, right? So I would take that kind of feedback very seriously, to be honest, because if multiple people are telling me that they are great but not getting along, there has to be some truth to it, right? So I think, yes, this is a very difficult topic. It's actually harder than measuring productivity
Right.
because there is a lot of subjectivity when you
Mhm.
do performance management. Subjectivity, bias, personal opinions, right? The day of the week, the time of the day, everything impacts that. So it is
Right.
actually one of the hardest things I think engineering managers and leaders have to do in their job.
Yeah, yeah. And also unconscious biases. Sometimes a recent incident happened and it's fresh in my memory, cannot impact the performance evaluation for the entire year. So making sure that you're not biased and taking the data throughout the year and then bucketing them. And then, of course, the feedback from your peers and everything put together is what is going to be the performance evaluation. Yeah, even though we started with developer productivity, this actually got me curious. You're right about not going by these numbers to define somebody's performance. If we get to that route, this will not work out
Yes.
because there's always
Yeah.
be a gaming process. One more important question is you've hit all the metrics in the sense Dora metrics, and then coming back to the space metrics, you said, how do you measure if the developers are happy? Is it through a survey? Or what are your tools to understand if they're
Yeah,
really enjoying their
yeah.
work?
Yeah, I think surveys are the most common and available in the industry today. And it's becoming easier and easier to do surveys because, yes, we all, work in places where we get, employee survey, we get from industry, we get Stack Overflow survey, we get, ChatGPT is sending surveys nowadays, right? So yes, there are several surveys where you can measure the satisfaction with the product, with the tool, and just overall well-being. So that's the most important one. But I also feel that in product or on point feedback is very important. What I mean by that is, let's say if you are providing a tool to your developer community, it's important that you ask for feedback immediately when they do the task, right? Which is a very common thing in products, in e-commerce, in products today, that if you, let's say if you're using some tool or a website, immediately they will ask you feedback. Not everyone will give it, but people who actually give it, you can then start capturing and building up to understand how their experience has been with this tool or the other tool.
Right.
So the in-point feedback as well as the survey is a combination of those two. Definitely is helpful in understanding how satisfied they are with the impact and the job that they are doing.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic. We were talking about AI throughout our conversation a little bit about the PR reviews and also generating code. What are the other areas that I can use AI tools to improve productivity?
Yeah, I think the way we are seeing AI and generative AI evolve in past year, it's everywhere, right? So there's no shortage of use cases anymore. We know that any new technology, like anything that comes new, it takes a little bit time to get mature and be applicable to different use cases. So today, where we are in the industry is it can be applied to any area, right? But is it mature enough for that area is the question you need to ask based on, I would say, there are a few things that you need to keep in mind. And the most important is data. Because
Right.
generative AI is as good as the data you provide, right?
Mhm.
So if you're working in an environment where your data quality is low, in let's say documentation, right? And you build a chatbot, which is very easy to do nowadays, right? You build a chatbot, or you actually take off the shelf open source chatbot, put it in front of your documentation. It's not going to be great experience, or it's not going to be great for productivity because your documentation is not good. So I think you gotta figure out what are the areas where I have good documentation or I don't need documentation. So for example, generating a boilerplate code, right?
Mhm.
Which is easy to do. You can do it using open source, Olama, you can use ChatGPT, you can use any of those tools today, right? To generate boilerplate code because it doesn't need to know the code repository you're working with. It doesn't need to know the ecosystem of your company or your
Mhm.
product. All it needs is open source GitHub repository training
Mhm.
data, which it has already, right? So whether it's Code Llama, whether it's Olama, or any of the smaller models that can run on your MacBook, actually, you can use any of those to generate boilerplate code. But if you talk about I want to write a functionality for my e-commerce website or my registration website this way, that way, which should use these 5 APIs I already have. I'm sorry, it's not mature enough to do that, right? So
Right.
I think where we are, and it's evolving, it will be there soon. So we definitely need to see what are the tasks that we are doing day to day, and those tasks are, do we have enough data, or can we use data on the internet to use
Mhm.
as is as a helper to the person, right? So the human in the loop is definitely always there because ultimately it's not mature enough to do any task on its own. But if you bring human in the loop, can this tool be, this AI capability be the helper for the human? Is the question you got to ask.
Right, right. So right now AI is in its primitive stage. We just started to get AI everywhere and trying to experiment with it. So right now it's acting as a human support system. For a hypothetical situation, do you ever think that AI will become mature enough that you just need to dictate what it needs to do, like just a business scenario, and it'll create the end-to-end application for you without having a human developer involved? Do you foresee that coming? It's a hypothetical question.
It's, yeah, and if it's hypothetical, yes, but what's the timeline we are
Yeah,
talking about, right?
yeah.
The timeline, are we talking in months, in years, or what was the timeline we are talking about is the most important, and what kind of application? Again, I think the way to think about this is, you have simple applications, you get interns, right? You would love to give them an end-to-end application which has back end, front end, a database connection, it has a customer experience, it has everything, right?
Right.
Because they can gain experience. But you will not pick the most critical business application with 5 or 6 different business functionality. You will pick something simple, right? And it will do for them as a project, right? And they will actually deliver. And I feel that if you're talking about a business functionality of an enterprise ecosystem where you have multiple dependencies, it's going to take years to
Right.
mature. If you're
Right.
talking a small product, a feature that is small enough where you are trying to, you have an idea and you're saying, oh, only if I had a website, or if I had a product feature that I can show to my customers, yeah,
Mhm.
I think we will get there in months time, not
Mhm.
years time, right?
Mhm.
And this is the beauty, because a lot of ideas are there, and humans are the people actually that AI cannot do, humans can do, is creative thinking. They can come up with innovative ideas, right? But today, when someone has an innovative idea, they are actually waiting for a technical person to implement it, for
Mhm.
someone to explain how cloud works, where they deploy. Those things definitely can be automated, and more creative ideas will actually become products. Will they be successful or not depends on the product and the idea, but we will see more of those in real life,
Yeah.
definitely sooner than later.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, not just in the developer space, everywhere. If I have to write a book, I have so many tools, AI tools these days that I can chuck in a book out in a week or two if it's a children's book. Yeah, this was very fantastic conversation, Daljit. We covered pretty much everything that we wanted to talk about today. Do you have anything more to add?
No, it was really good. I think we touched upon so many different things, from productivity to Gen AI to performance management to people management. I think we touched upon several topics, and thank you for inviting me. Very fruitful conversation, and thank you for adding all the points that you did. I'm really fascinated with your role and what you're trying to do there. Yeah, nice
Yeah.
conversation.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm pretty sure my audience will love this discussion too. I'll share it with my team. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah, bye bye.
Bye.